This is the mess my life has become. So, in our debate about legalization versus criminalization versus decriminalization versus the Swedish model versus this versus that versus everything in the universe, I think we forgot a whole lot about stigma. Dakota brought it up about how, yes, you can legalize these things, you can decriminalize these things, but that has nothing to do with the stigma surrounding it. She brought up that it's prostitution is legalized in the Netherlands, but you still can't put down on your work resume that you've been a prostitute or a sex worker. We have to remember that law does not equal morality. Law can be interpreted in many ways. Uh, that's why we have lawyers. What makes law change stigma is when there is active enforcement of these legalized professions, people's rights, because that is a display within society that can help with the social change. Because social change is, in the end, what I think everyone works towards in movements. Like, it only matters so much if you get a law on the books to help end discrimination in like the workplace or with housing. But it's a whole other thing to have that enforced and have people believe that you should have equal opportunity to get housing or employment, you know? Like here in the Netherlands, heroin addiction is low, and it's not just because weed is legal, it's because of a lot of things, but it's easy to seek and really receive mental health help. And who was talking to us about that? It was whoever talked to us about the history of the Netherlands. Was it Bose? Maybe. Anyway, was talking about the fact that like when writing up what a citizen was, part of that was they have emotional happiness. And so that was a belief that the society had. And so they made it easier legally for people to seek that kind of help. It wasn't just because weed is legal, it has a whole lot of other aspects to it too, which is why I don't think if we legalized weed in the United States, there would be a dip down in hard substance abuse, because we have a very huge stigma against mental illness and seeking treatment for that. And so I feel like the same is true with any kind of stigmatized thing in society. You need social change first, and social change of all aspects of the problem. Um, for sex work, that would be around the aspect of education, of sex positivity, of law enforcement, all these different aspects. But they start on the social level. So that's what we need to look at when combating issues. So, first off, the speaker from Out and Proud talked a lot about the double life that a lot of African refugees will lead while they are in their home country. And that reminded me a lot of one of the books I had to read. Well, I didn't have to read, I chose to read. For my introduction to women's authors, I chose to read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. And it reminded me a lot of the main character, who was a lesbian while part of this very strict church that was kind of cult-like. And so she would lie and say, like, these people were her friends or whatever. And so spending the night was like, we're studying the Bible, but they were closer to studying anatomy, but whatever. And then I also don't, this like discussion we were having in class today, it was so focused on binary thinking, and like something either has to be innate or you choose it. I don't see why it can't be a combination of the two or neither. I don't think it's inborn, and I don't think it's a choice. I'm not really sure what I think sexuality is, but from my own personal experience and my own sexuality, it changes based on who I'm attracted to. So for me, that kind of muddles the two together to a point where I don't really know which it is, you know? Because I think a lot of the categories under which we define ourselves are created under this hierarchical society and systems of oppression. Because, if we take these systems of oppression away, do we still have the categories of gay and straight and queer? Like with what Shoshana was talking about, what does the world look like without these systems of oppression? I don't think we would feel the need to be labeled because these labels are in place to keep us in certain places in society. After taking History 420, the most controversial thought I have is that no one is heterosexual per se because of the fact that these categories because of the fact that these categories just simply wouldn't exist without these systems of oppression. You look at history in the past, and race wasn't created until, America, pretty much. Whiteness wasn't created until the Revolutionary War, per se, in the way that Americans perceive whiteness. We have existed before these labels and will exist after them. I don't see the importance on relying on whether or not these things are inborn or if you choose to do them, if you are a part of the movement to destroy these systems of power. I do understand the need to focus on them to make people realize that we are all under a system of power and in some way oppressed. Because right now I'm not working with, but I have a lot of discussions with my partner because he is a cis male about kind of not only his privileges, but how he becomes oppressed by these labels and how they are meant to keep him in place, and like how to combat them. And so I think the inborn versus innate is needed to see how to combat those, but like the argument won't be necessary if the LGBTQ plus group succeeds in their larger goal, which to me has always been destroying these systems of oppression, just like it is for feminism. I think feminism is very queer in that aspect. All right, so I needed a couple of days to process the whole BDSM lecture and my thoughts on it. There's Ashley right there because I'm in their room. And when we talked a lot about what was in the BDSM community, like blood play and breath play and subspace and all that, we didn't talk about why it was considered a part of the BDSM because of what is seen as normal, or as what we like to call vanilla. And I thought about this because I remember one time my boyfriend and I were talking about like things we would like to incorporate and try out and whatnot, and I said some things and he was like, whoa, that's kinky. And I thought, no, that's still pretty vanilla in my mind. And so we talk about vanilla all the time and like deviating from the normal practice of sex, but we haven't really defined it yet. Is it just... Oh, fuck, I can't remember. What's the one position where you're just like...
Missionary?
Yes. Is it just missionary position? Is it solely man and woman, procreative? Since there's homonormativity, is there like a vanilla way to have gay sex. Like, these are things that we haven't really talked about. What is the norm besides the identifier of like white, straight, homonormative, monogamous? You know, what is the the vanilla sex practice? Why is it vanilla? What does that do for connotations of things? What I think is vanilla may not be what other people think is vanilla, hence my boyfriend's reaction. Um, because maybe a lot of people would be surprised as to what that includes or what it excludes and how they fit into that. Yeah. I welcome you again to Carter and Ashley's room for a KP Says Stuff. Unlike other weeks in the conclusion where I kind of looked back and said my lessons that I learned, this week I'm going to try something different since it is the 4th week and we only have 1 week left, and talk about looking forward. So this week we have a returning lecturer. She first visited us in the 3rd week, talking to us about different issues regarding the medicalization of trans people, and was like, oh, it all seems so shitty right now, but the next time I come, we're going to talk about solutions. And so I think that's kind of what all these past weeks have been about, is about dumping the problems down on us, because part of the thing with social sciences is that there is no really known solution. We all just hear the problems and we seemingly trace it back to something or other. Some people think it's this, other people think it's that, and blah, 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 blah. But what is it really? No one knows. So it's up to each of us to hear it and then debate on it within ourselves and go out into the world and do something, which can be hard and a lot and seem kind of like a burden for some people. But so after hearing all the stigma surrounding things like sex work, the BDSM community, gay people, Muslims, queer people, all in the Netherlands, it has become especially apparent to me that these are social issues, and in order to affect legality or the system or anything, you have to affect the social first, because while the social affects the legal, it can still exist outside of the system. And so in order to make change to the system, to destroy the system, you have to operate in a way outside of it. And so what does that look like with these issues? I'm not really sure. I do know that the COC specifically has become ingrained with the government in organizing protests, and so that's not working outside the system. I know that in America, there's a big divide between the Black Lives Matter movement and people from the civil rights movement beforehand, like from SNCC and whatnot, because SNCC oftentimes worked with the government or did protests that would not do anything outside of what the government deemed unright or violent or anything, whereas the Black Lives Matter movement now sees the system as a problem, so they try to protest and work outside of it. And I feel like that's how it is here in the Netherlands with gay people and gay movements versus queer movements, because queer movement, by definition, since they are people that exist outside of the binary, already, exist outside of the system, whereas there's the homonormativity that we've been talking about. So I don't know where I'm really going with this or what we need to do to change things, but it is a social change that needs to happen. Let's see what week 5 has in store.